Well, hello again. It's time for our midterm test review. Uh, Test will pretty much be cumulative up to this point. And there are a couple of things we're going to hit toward the end of this little review that I want to hit that you may or may not have gotten in your review of the technical assistance document or the Larry Lewis book. So, but as we moved along through the course, we've covered many topics involved in the funding or the various revenue streams available to Oklahoma Public Schools. Our midterm test is obviously opening up soon, and I think a review or recap is in order now. I'll provide the review in narrative form, but you need to remember, while 100% of what we cover today won't make the test, 100% of what the test is will be covered, okay? Not 100% of what we talk about today will be on the test, but 100% of the test will be covered today. Now, we began our lectures earlier on speaking about how in our state the idea of relative fairness is applied toward school funding. That means that while we try to be fair, and I mean the royal we, the state we, while we try to be fair within the funding formula, it's acknowledged that many communities across the state are better able to provide supplementary funding to the schools than others can. Okay? Since Oklahoma is a blended state in terms of funding with state and local funding, sometimes this relative fairness may not quite be as fair as we would like it to be. We've spoken about this earlier on. And the bottom line is that's what we have. That's what we have to work with. It's a haves and have-nots situation. We've talked about this many times before. But we know that both the Oklahoma Constitution and state statutes allow school districts to tax property, otherwise known as ad valorem taxing, like the majority of other states. Most states use a property-based taxation formula when looking toward funding their schools. Okay, these taxes can be added to with bonding for specific purposes, such as building school facilities, buying technology, or buses. There's a list of statutorily recognized things that you can bond for, but that list changes periodically, but that's basically what it's for. Buying property, building buildings, buying technology, or school buses, that type of thing. Of course, air conditioning, things such as that would also fit in there. Now, when you are bonding, and let's say your school passes a bond, you know that's equal to 10% of the evaluation of the district. So if your district is valued at $50 million, then you're able to bond $5 million. That's cumulative. So if you already have $2 million out, you can't do $5 million more. You can only do $3 million more, and so on. Okay? When these are paid back, to pay them back, schools establish what is called a sinking fund, and that is what the money is collected. Tax money is collected for this purpose. It's deposited in a sinking fund, and then you make your payment yearly from the sinking fund to the bank or other financial institution that may have bought the bonds to help you pay for whatever it is that you're trying to fund. So if you don't have a bond on the books, you don't have a sinking fund. Okay, only schools that have bonds have a sinking fund. Okay, some schools, and we've discussed this, are better positioned than others to do this. Okay, but it is important to note that in almost all school districts, state aid or formula funding is the largest source of funding. It's not always that case if they're a huge district that has a tremendous amount of ad valorem or a tremendous amount of oil and gas activity or things like that. You can outpace the state aid. But in the vast majority of schools in Oklahoma, over probably 98% of them, state aid is the biggest source of funding. Okay? The formula, state aid, the formula, it's the same thing. Federal funding is very significant. Okay? Your title programs, things such as that. But it's generally the smallest of the three. And since we've talked about federal and we've talked about ad valorem, then the another name for ad valorem, of course, would be local funding. So state is the formula, ad valorem is the local, and federal is your federal programs. Child nutrition doesn't fit into that. We're not talking about that specific program. That's a different thing altogether. Okay, we're talking about funding streams within the general fund. Okay, local, state, and federal. Which is the largest almost all the time? State funding. All right, when we speak about ad valorem taxes, and you'll learn to do this a lot. I talk about it a lot. We need to remember that they're assessed in increments called mills. We talked about this earlier. A mill is equal to 1/10 of a cent. Mills are assessed in differing amounts for different reasons. And you can look in the technical assistance document and find out those percentages and how many mills go for each thing. We went over that in an earlier lecture. But the bottom line is that even when you do a bond, which is an increasing of the ad valorem taxes for a specific purpose for a limited amount of time, you're still just upping the millage. You're upping the mills. You're charging a certain amount of mills. Okay? And a mill is 1/10 of a percent. Mills are also only charged, ad valorem taxes are only charged on the first 35% of the assessed value of property. So if you have property, we'll just make it easy, and the assessed value is $100,000, then you're only going to pay ad valorem taxes on the first $35,000 of the value of that property. If it's worth $1 million, then it's $350,000. If it's $10 million, it's $3.5 million. Okay? And businesses are charged an even lower percentage. We covered that earlier in another lecture as well. Now, we should know that some taxes or funding streams are held against schools in such a way. We've talked about this before. I'm talking about chargeables. Chargeables include gross production taxes, okay, or depletion taxes, if you want to call it that, on oil and gas, minerals, things like that. REA taxes, that's rural electrification, like PEC or Canadian Valley or Southeastern Electric, those type of folks. And school land earnings, okay, we talked about land being held in common, the school land, and we all get a percentage of that sent back to us based on our per capita, in other words, how many students we have, our ADM. And then car tag dollars, okay, car tag dollars, we've talked about that. They used to be allocated on how many ran through the particular county tag office that you lived in. Whatever county you lived in, their tag office. Now it's still based on what county you live in, but you don't have to go to that specific tag office. They channel it all back from the state regardless of where you buy your tag. So if you buy your car in Tulsa and you go tag it there, the money still comes back to Allen or Colgate or Chickasha or wherever. Okay. Chargeables are just that. They are monies, local funds that you may or may not have had anything to do with. In other words, maybe there's a big plant that's in your area. Maybe they're just across the line in your district. Maybe most of the people that work there live in another district. So you're getting a windfall from something that you may or may not have had anything to do with. What if that plant was doing something like electricity? Okay. There used to be one. There is one at Kanawha Lake. For years, whatever school district that the plant landed in got all the money that was generated at that plant. Got all the tax money. Schools went to court. They changed that 20-something years ago, maybe 30 years ago now. And so it's all parceled out basically based on the lines that come through your district going to that plant. Okay, the amount of customers that you have in your school district make a big difference on this. Now, Kanawha still gets some money because the building is there, and the building is taxed based on personal property, but it isn't taxed like it was in terms of them getting all the revenue. Okay, so that was bad for them. That was good for everybody else. There's towns all over Oklahoma. Red Rock was the same way by Billings. So they had a big plant there, coal-fired plant, and that little school's a dependent district. I don't think it plays football if they've got a football field, because they had more money than they knew what to do with for years. So they built a bunch of stuff. Well, they don't get all that money anymore. We're digressing just a little bit, but you need to understand those things. Some of the haves aren't haves anymore, or they're not quite as big a have as they used to be. By the same token, some of the schools that are have-nots get to have a little more, and that's kind of how that works. But to equalize this as much as they possibly can, the formula charges back dollars generated from the formula here in terms of the chargeables, the 4 things that we talked about, 5 things: gross production, REA, school land earnings, and ad valorem taxes, car tags. Those are charged back against that district, against their state aid, their coming state aid, next year's state aid, at 75 cents on the dollar. So that slows down some of the haves from getting too far ahead. Now there are some districts like Jenks. There's one in Oklahoma City area, on the west edge of Oklahoma City. Can't remember the name of it right this second. But they have so many large homes in it that they don't get any state aid. Jenks gets very little state aid. There are a few schools that in the past few years didn't get state aid, maybe 3 or 4, because of oil and gas exploration in their districts. But with the downturn in the oil patch, they're back in. So ad valorem is more of a constant in this than gross production. Gross production tends to come up and down. You may get a big check this year, but you're going to get a big check taken away from you next year, and so on. Okay, so let's keep rolling. Okay, you have to budget these things. It's a big deal. You have to account for it, or you're gonna get in a bind. Okay. There are several questions on the midterm that come from the funding formula itself. So I would look at the formula. I put a PowerPoint on in the course that goes through the formula individually. So look at those weights in the formula. Free and reduced lunch, gifted and talented, special education, things like that. Even the very grade weights of the kids, the weights for the kids who are in various grades. You had an exercise about that. So take a look at the weights. There's a couple of questions on there that's, which is a big weight, which is not, and so on. We don't go super deep there because I don't expect you to have them all memorized. but just keep in mind, okay, it's based on the relative expense of educating a child in that particular grade or with that particular disability or ability. Okay, we keep it in talented. Okay, some grades are funded higher than others. Okay, and we talk about that. Whether the kids are poor, gifted, and talented, special ed, each get more in the formula. Okay, we should also remember state aid or formula funding is not received during the month of July. So the money that you get the other 11 months has to be budgeted accordingly and stretched as much as you possibly can to make it. Okay, so you receive it for 11 months, not 12, but your bills keep coming. Okay, so we have to keep that in mind. You know, those of you who want to be principals, keep that in mind when you're interviewing for a principal's job or you're dealing with your superintendent. Be empathetic toward the box that your superintendent is in. Okay, help them out. You know, we don't know how people get jobs sometimes. Maybe they're deficient in an area that you're better at. Offer to help. Don't be a know-it-all, but offer to help. Okay. As for special education, for many years, many Oklahoma schools had felt that it was against the rules to place special ed students under 9 into specific educational categories or special ed categories. They thought that there was actually something called developmental delay, DD. They thought it was a rule that we couldn't. And in reality, the whole time, we could. We just had to check the box and decide to do that. Okay? So students can be categorized at a younger age. That was a misconception a lot of schools had. Some still have it. I was in school very recently who wasn't doing that. So, as of a year ago in July, you can even place kids based on a suspected specific disability, even if they maybe are too young to test. So that's a big change, okay? And it's expensive for the state of Oklahoma to do that, but they have gotten on board. Okay, another area, and this is probably the last thing we're going to cover in this review. I've told you where to find the answers. I've told you a bunch of the answers already. But one area that we have not covered specifically in depth in the class, but I do think you should know it by now, particularly since you guys are leaders in your buildings and you have worked with activity funds over the years, let's talk about activity funds. Now, if you look in the technical assistance document in the Lewis book, there's all kinds of stuff about activity funds. There are a few questions about it on the test, and we're going to go over them here. These are some of the best funds to use in schools, and they are very flexible so long as the rules are followed. Flexibility is also dangerous sometimes because those who are lax or inattentive to the rules can get in trouble. Okay. Activity funds are looser than general funds in that they don't have to have the superintendent's signature, okay, or even board approval before a check is written, okay, but they do have to be spent. They must be spent for specific purposes that have been previously approved by the school board. You probably put in fundraiser requests. Now, depending on who your superintendent or principal is, he either said be very specific about what you're going to do and how you're going to spend this money, or he said, hey, write this in such a way that there might be some expenditures that you might do, okay? If you think you could possibly do them over the course of the year, go ahead and put them in. You don't have to, but you cannot spend activity funds for any purpose that you didn't previously specify, okay? So say, you know, if you think you might do a field trip, say things such as, you know, educational expenses for my students, such as field trips, art supplies, any of that stuff. We might do an art project. We might go to the zoo. We might buy each other leather jackets. Whatever it is. You don't have to do those things. But if you choose to do those things or anything with that money, it has to be on that fundraiser approval sheet. If you spend money for something that the board didn't pre-approve on that fundraiser request, you could really get in trouble. Okay, if you don't spend it for the declared purpose, then it's an illegal expenditure. Okay, so that's a big deal. Be careful. It's good to write the expenditure explanation on the fundraiser request as broad as you can to make sure that you can get the money spent. If you're a principal, let your sponsors, let your coaches know this, okay? Let them know this. Because if they tie their hands too tightly and then jump off and spend some money that they shouldn't have, everybody gets in trouble, okay? You have to file an illegal expenditure report, and it's a big deal. It's not a huge deal, but it's more than you need to do if you know the rules and you follow the rules. And if you stack up too many of those, the auditor doesn't like it, and you can get in trouble. Now, let me say this about loose funds. They're dangerous. It's like working in a bank. If you're around money all the time, if you're collecting money, if there's money laying out, if there's proceeds from the, concession stand, or a teacher who's selling T-shirts or sausage or whatever, man, develop some procedures in your district that you live by. That's part of your Bible, and stick with them. Because cash money floating around is easy to stick in your pocket. People that you would have never dreamed. I've had lifelong friends get in trouble with fundraiser money, lose their jobs, lose their career, lose their families because maybe they had a gambling habit, or maybe the kid needed braces, or maybe they just thought it wasn't hurting anybody. Okay. Stealing is stealing. Don't do it. Okay? Don't do it. Okay. Now let's talk about some of this too. Activity funds. They have to be signed by a supervisor, but they don't have to be signed by the superintendent. Now, if your district has policy that it has to, and some do, that's fine. But you don't have to. The principal, the AD, a program director, an assistant superintendent, any of those folks can sign a PO in the activity fund, okay? They are not board approved before the expenditure is done. So if a PO is signed, the teacher, sponsor, coach, whoever can make that purchase, do that thing, go to that play, take that trip, whatever it happens to be. And it's perfectly legal. And they bring back the bill, and a check can be cut. They can even take a check with them. Okay, we're going to feed the softball team today. It's going to cost $305. I did this a couple of weeks ago myself. Okay, and so we knew how much it was going to cost. We knew who was going to eat. We knew who was going to be there. It was kind of a cut and dry deal. So we brought a check with $305 with us, and we gave to the restaurant. And everything was cool. Okay. So you can take a check with you. They can put a little note on it that says, hey, we need to take the check with us when you process this. So have the check cut by a certain date. I'll come by and pick it up. That's all perfectly fine. Okay? Now, if you followed all the rules, then the money can be spent. Okay? Now, this is kind of a big deal. It's not a huge deal, but if you didn't know it, it could unnerve you. Okay? Let's talk about it for a second. Responsibility for maintenance of individual activity accounts is on the school and solely on the school. Okay? So here's what I mean. The bank, when money is put in the activity account, That's just one giant account that says, Bing Public Schools activity account. It might have $200,000 in it, depending on, however much money you have, or it might have $15 in it. If you're a tiny school, it's not going to have as much money. Maybe, maybe not. There are some small schools that let kids in their classes save money for 4 or 5 years. I mean, from 7th grade up, they can start saving money toward their senior trip. It's thousands and thousands of dollars. And that money accumulates in that account. So the 7th grade leftover money or trip money is carried forward to 8th grade. And 8th grade is carried over to 9th grade. It's assigned to the class of, 2022. Whatever. Who cares? Okay? The point is, it's just in the activity account as far as the bank is concerned. It is up to the district, the individual district, to keep track of what club put the money in, which coach put the money in, okay? Who raised the money, who made the deposit. That's all district stuff, okay? Your auditor cares. Certainly the individuals who raised the money care. Bank doesn't care. It's just money, okay? It's just in that account, okay? They aren't going to, Susie Q, the FCCLA teacher, is not going to be able to call the bank and go, can you tell me exactly what my balance is in my activity account? No, they can't tell you that, because it's just a giant account. It might have $200,000, of which $3,500 is FCCLA. 80,000 might be, something else, the band, band boosters, whatever, some groups. That's another thing. Some booster groups are inside the activity account, some are not. I would recommend the boosters are outside. Boosters will get you in trouble. Leave them outside. That's a recommendation. That isn't a rule. You can do what you want. Your school will do what you want. But I would suggest that schools keep their club money inside and their booster money outside. Okay, it's just easier. It's just easier on everybody. So there it is. We've gone over pretty much everything that is in your midterm, and it's going to open up, and you can do that. You can do it open book. I've been a superintendent for 19, 20 years. Okay. I've been an administrator for 29, I think, something like that. Okay. And I don't know all the rules. Everything I do every day, unless I am absolutely certain, I go look at the book. I go look up the rule. I think I know the rule, but sometimes the rules change. Sometimes I have a misconception. I've just recently started being superintendent again. I had stopped for a couple of years, and I did some consulting and things like that. But now it's my ball game again. I'm a soup again at a school, and I'm having to refresh myself. Okay, I see no difference between myself as a 28, 29-year school administrator having to look up the rules, and you as a student having to look up the rules. The point is that you lurch into the correct decision, that you get it right. I am by far more interested in you getting it right than us having some kind of gotcha moment, and I get to explain to you how you were wrong. If you'd have listened to Uncle Billy, we could have got you right. Now, that's all true. Okay, if you listen to me, you will be right. I can't help that. But seriously, it's about getting it right when you need to get it right. It's test time. Let's get it right. Call me if you got any questions. I love every one of you. I want you to do well. You're kind of like my children. So let's get it right. Open book test works for me. Okay. If you don't keep the book open for the rest of your career, you're going to fail. And I don't mean a test. You're going to fail your school. You're going to fail yourself. Hang in there. Give me a call if you need me. God bless every one of you. Good night.